He had everything, even after death.
When a murder happens in a quiet Amish village, the elder's daughter must choose between faith, love, and the truth, even if it shatters her world. If you want to hear what happens next, please subscribe to our channel, hit like, and help us gather more subscribers. I woke to a scream that split the silence as cleanly as a knife cuts a rope. At first, I thought a board had fallen in the barn or the geese were honking at a fox. But the sound was human ragged, searing, the kind you could never mistake for anything else. I jumped up from the bench, threw a dark shawl over my shoulders, and ran barefoot across the yard, where milk-white mist still lay and the air smelled of wet wood, oats, and the ash of yesterday's fire. The pantry door stood ajar, and the night draft had blown dry leaves inside. It seemed to me the leaves were rustling as if calling someone without a voice. I pushed the door wider. It creaked and gave. On the floor, among sacks of corn, Eli lay in a dark pool. His pale face was turned toward me, his eyes half-lidded, as if he were peering up at me from the bottom of a well. His right hand gripped a knife. I knew at once. It wasn't our kitchen knife, the one Mama uses to slice pies. And it wasn't our carpentry blade, the one Daddy uses to split twine. The handle was different, darker, with a pattern I had never seen in our house. "Eli," I whispered, and my voice broke against my will. My knees gave out. I fell beside him and touched his shoulder. It was warm, but not the way it is when he wipes his brow in the field and laughs, warm from blood that hadn't cooled yet. I pressed my palm to his chest and prayed, not out loud like we do on Sundays, but quietly, the way you pray when something dark and unseen is falling from the sky. "Lord, do not take him. Lord, not now." It was dark in the pantry. Only a broken ray of morning slipped through a crack and laid a stripe of light across his hand. A drop gleamed on the knife's edge like a star lost under the roof. I jerked my hand back and held my breath because I thought he moved, but it was only me shifting his shirt. "Rachel," Daddy called from the yard. I heard footsteps, careful, like steps on a footbridge when spring water runs beneath you. I had no time to hide anything, no time to find words. Daddy came in and stopped in the doorway. He didn't cry out or cross himself wide like others do. He only pressed his fingers to his forehead, as if to halt a thought, and looked for a long time. "Don't touch him again, daughter," he said quietly. I edged away, and my palms left red half-moons on the floor. Mama ran in after him, a corner of her apron pressed to her mouth. Behind her came our neighbor Abram, who had arrived with a wagon for hay. They stood there, silent, breathing hard, and every look felt like a nail driven into wood. "We must call the deacon and the brothers," Daddy said. He spoke evenly, without haste, as if he were shelving heavy books one by one. "And a doctor from outside let him certify it." "A doctor," Mama gulped air like a sharp crumb. "But a doctor as well," Daddy repeated, and looked at me, tired and stern. "Did you see him come in here?" I shook my head. I felt ashamed that I was alive and breathing while he lay there with no words. A dull roar filled my ears. Probably someone behind the partition was scalding a chicken, and its wings were beating an empty pail. I exhaled and finally managed to say, "The knife isn't ours." Daddy looked at the blade, at the handle. "A stranger's," he said, short as a judge, and that word dropped between us like a live coal. We didn't argue. Mama set her hand on my shoulder and led me into the yard, because the screams were already gathering people. Neighbors coming from all directions, shawls clutched to chins, boys in shirts not yet laced, elders squinting with stern eyes. They didn't ask much. They looked with the calm of monks, but in every gaze there was an endless why. I sat on the bottom step of the porch, felt the cold wood under my thighs and a slick stain I hadn't noticed. With my finger, I traced a tiny cross on my knee and wiped it away, ashamed of the childish habit. The deacon came quickly in long strides that didn't kick up dust. He took off his hat, knelt in the doorway, and worked the edge of the brim between his fingers for a long time. "Let us pray," he said. We bowed our heads. The prayer was plain as bread and steady as the line between our fields. I spoke the words I'd known since I was small, and in every "Thy will be done," I heard a quiet, "Why not ours?" When the deacon rose, Daddy briefly explained how we had found him, then added, "The knife is a stranger's." The deacon nodded, but his eyes slid past, as if that word were better left for later. He leaned over and looked at Ellie's hand. He held it tight, he said, like talking to himself, maybe by his own hand. Mama flinched, and I felt something dark and hot rise inside me, not anger, not tears, something else. Eli could not have, burst out of me. Everyone turned to me, and I suddenly heard how my voice sounded proud, sharp, as if I were defying not only the deacon's words, but our whole order. I dropped my gaze. I swallowed. He wasn't like that. He gets queasy at the doctor's needles. He wouldn't turn a blade on himself. Daddy straightened, and in his silence there was a warning. "Rachel," he said, looking me in the eyes, "be quiet now. Let the elders see." I fell silent, but silence did not mean consent. I had known Ellie since we herded geese together in the marsh and laughed when they tugged at our skirts. I knew how he sang at meeting, not loud, but true, how he kept a smooth stone in his pocket he called "Good Day," and he'd press it into my palm when he saw me low. I remembered his hands, no cuts, old calluses from the scythe, and how he always frowned when touching an edge, like someone who doesn't like the shine of steel. He could not, I repeated to myself so the words would not be lost. An English doctor, meaning an outsider, arrived, his old pickup rattling under the willow. He spoke little, never raised his voice, and watched closely, avoiding needless motions. Folks stepped back to make room. He examined the body, asked for water, wiped the blade with a white cloth, inspected the handle. He nodded to one of our men, but said nothing out loud, as if he respected our rule. Prayer first, words after. The deacon and Daddy led him aside and weighed their words. I caught fragments. Deep, angle, left hand or right, marks on the palm. The sun climbed higher and the mist disappeared. The youngest children stood apart with their hands stuffed into pockets, unsure whether they could laugh if someone mentioned the fair that was supposed to be in a week. The chickens edged toward the pantry threshold and, meeting men's boots, scurried off, offended. I sat there, time gone hollow, and for the second time that morning, a shameless thought rose in me. The knife isn't his. Who brought it here? Who set it in his hand? And with that thought, new air came into me, heavier than usual, but air you can breathe and walk on. When they carried the body out, Mama laid her warm palm on my knee. "Hold fast," she said, and I nodded. I did not cry. The tears would come when everyone left, and in the house, the ticking clock and the sputter of milk on the stove could be heard again. For now I stared at the dark streak left on the sill and knew one thing. What happened cannot be covered with prayer like bread with a towel. Prayer is needed, but so is truth. "Rachel," Daddy called softly as people began to disperse. "You're not going to the fields today. Stay with Mama. I will talk with the brothers and with John." He said the name simply, with no hint of suspicion. I clenched my fingers. "All right," I answered. My voice was steady, and that surprised me. I rose, picked up his old hat with the crumpled ribbon, the one that had fallen when the body was carried out, and ran a finger along the broken quill at the brim. "I'll put it away," I said, and carried the hat inside, walking slow, as if I were carrying not a hat, but a word I did not yet know how to speak. On the threshold I stopped and looked back. The pantry stood wide open. It was empty now, yet I could still hear leaves rustle inside and a soft no that didn't blow away with the morning wind. After the funeral, the yard grew quieter, but it wasn't our kind of quiet, not the kind that comes after work, not the kind where you hear the laundry drying on the line. This quiet was a question. I moved about the house slowly, as if afraid to bump a table corner, and set into motion something already balanced on the edge. Mama asked me to sit and embroider a new towel for the harvest celebration, but the thread snarled in my fingers and the pattern kept breaking. The same words spun in my head. The knife isn't his. I went back to the pantry once people were gone. It smelled of dry grain, old sticky apple juice, and iron. A dark stripe stained the floorboards where tomorrow Daddy would scrape close with a blade so nothing remained. I crouched by the threshold and peered into the cracks between the boards. A few tiny splinters were wedged there, thin as needles. I pried one out with a fingernail. It didn't smell like our pine. It smelled of something else, more astringent hickory, a wood our men rarely use, though lately John had boasted of a new handle for his adze. Strong as bone. I slipped the splinter into my apron pocket without saying a word. In my mind's eye, that stranger's knife stood out gray. I remembered the handle dark, with shallow cross-hatching, as if someone had worked it with a leather all so fingers would not slip. In our family, we don't fuss with such carving. A wooden spoon cuts what we need. Simplicity saves us. I closed my eyes and ran my fingertips through the air as if touching that texture again, and realized I had seen something like it on the shop knife in our leatherworker Samuel's place. He sometimes buys metal from the English and then stitches his straps. "I'll go for buttons," I told Mama when the sun stood straight overhead. Mama nodded without asking. In our home, we learned long ago to trust short reasons. The path to Samuel's shed passed the well, the orchard, the cowshed, and cut along a narrow track beaten by children's feet. As I went by the stable, John Eli's older brother came out. He carried a sack of cornmeal on his shoulder, walking even and unhurried. His hat sat on him just so, as always, his beard clean and trimmed, his shirt buttoned to the neck despite the heat. "My sympathy," he said without stopping. His voice was even, his eyes open like a door with darkness behind it. "Thank you," I answered. I wanted to say more, that my heart could not accept what everyone had quietly accepted already, that I did not know how to put a period where I saw a comma. But the words stuck in my throat under his gaze. Not cold, not cruel clear, like a bowl rinsed clean. Sometimes cleanliness is more frightening than dirt. Samuel's workshop smelled of leather, oil, and smoke. He stood at the bench, stretching a dampened strap to see if the stitch would lay straight. "God's grace, Rachel," he said, raising his eyes. "I heard." "I need buttons," I said, and only when he fetched the box did I add, "And tell me, you trade for English metal. Have you seen knives lately with dark handles, cut with shallow grooves for an awl?" He frowned. "I have. Jacob from across the river brought in a batch. Cheap but sharp, hickory handles, cut for fingers. Why do you ask?" "Might need one for the kitchen by harvest." "Mama's thinking." Samuel nodded. "Don't give your mama that kind. Heavy and slick, no good in a kitchen. Take one of ours or an old piece of good steel." I glanced through a box of odds and ends on the shelf as if idly. Between half-broken razors and rusty blades lay that very kind of handle, dark, with shallow cuts. I touched it and caught the same tart scent as the splinter from the pantry. "How many were there?" I asked, lifting my eyes to Samuel. He counted slow in his head. 10. 2 young fellows took some for hunting. I kept one. One John took, wanted something respectable for carving in the yard. The rest scattered among families, can't recall which." He shrugged without suspicion. "John likes things neat." "He does," I echoed. The word settled inside me next to, "The knife is a stranger's," and "The splinter smells of hickory." I took the buttons, paid, and at the door turned back. "If Jacob brings more, tell me." Samuel smiled. "I'll tell anyone who asks. Women like having their own knife." I dipped my head and left. Then I did what our people don't favor. I went not home, but to the horse shed where John's bay mare was stalled. Horses don't betray secrets, yet they testify with sweat, with foam, with a chipped hoof. The bay had been brushed so thoroughly she smelled of soap. But on her right fetlock I noticed a thin, fresh scrape as if on metal. By the pen, a hoofprint pressed deep into the sand, longer and heavier than our unhurried morning rides. Someone had ridden hard at night, then carefully wiped off sweat with a wet rag. That is the habit of a man who loves order and does not like being looked at sideways. I stood with my palm on the warm curve of the mare's neck, thinking how to speak without breaking the narrow footbridge truth walks on among us. Words are heavy in our world. "I suspect" is a word that leans a roof, and "you lie" is a word that empties a house. I had no right to either, but I had no right to keep still either. I spoke first with Lee, my cousin who often brought us milk from her cows. We sat on the step, and I poured her water. "Did you see John last evening?" I asked as if I were wondering whether their well crank had broken. Lee wrinkled her nose. "It was a lively evening, right before the storm. I heard a wagon coughing on the road. I think it was John's, because his bay sometimes wheezes, but I didn't come out. I was putting the children down." She looked at me from under her brow. "Why do you ask?" "Because I'm thinking about the knife." "Men think about knives," she shrugged. "Women think about bread." And she looked away as if she had said more than she meant. That night we sat at the table a long time after the prayer, Daddy silent. Then he snapped his finger on the tabletop. "I spoke with the brothers. They will say Eli took his own life." Mama sighed like someone having another sack set onto her shoulders. "Because the knife was in his hand, because of the angle of the wound, because—" Daddy ticked the points off without looking at me or Mama. "And that way it is calmer for all. The sin is his, not ours." Something inside me rose. "And if it wasn't?" I asked. "If the sin was not his?" Daddy lifted his eyes slowly, like a heavy trunk lid. "Do you mean to say what?" I did not say. I only looked at my hands and thought how the smell of hickory still clung beneath my nails. After evening prayer, I stepped outside. The sky was deep. The stars were so near I wanted to gather them into my apron. On the road to John's place, John himself stood. He must have been coming from the stable and stopped when he saw me. "It's a bright night," he said, and this time I heard a trace of weariness in his voice. "Bright," I answered. We stood in silence, Oates whispering between us. "Eli was a good boy," he said at last. "He was," I agreed, and added without lifting my eyes, "and truthful." John received it like a prayer. "Truthful," he repeated. When he turned to go, I noticed on his right hand a thin, fresh scrape, like a stripe from a strap or rough wood. He slipped his hand into his pocket, and his sleeve covered the mark. It felt as if the ground under my feet hardened. I did not know everything and didn't want to know more than I should. But what I already knew would not settle into peace. I went back into the house, blew out the lamp, and sat in the dark until my eyes adjusted. Things don't lie in the dark. Walls stand where they stand. Tables keep their silence. In the dark, the words, "The knife is a stranger's," sound cleaner. The next morning, John came into our yard on his own. Not empty-handed, he brought a basket of eggs and a loaf wrapped in cloth. Mama took them, thanked him, and went inside. The two of us stayed by the feed rack. The cows breathed evenly. The warm scent of milk and hay hung in the air. John leaned an arm on the crosspiece and nodded at the bench. "Will you sit?" he asked calmly. "I'll stand," I said, and didn't move. He smiled a little, but his eyes stayed serious. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about the truth. We all want truth, but truth is sometimes heavier than a stone. Eli, he had his troubles. Did you know?" I knew him. "Trouble is not a reason to cut yourself in a pantry," I said, without raising my voice. John nodded as if in agreement, but his words took a different path. There were debts for lumber. There were talks with the English. There were letters. He didn't show them to Father. You know how we are about letters. "I know," I said. "I also know the knife was a stranger's." He pulled in a short breath and looked away toward the gate. "It happens that people take a stranger's thing in their hand," he said evenly, "especially when their soul doesn't feel like their own." We fell quiet. I looked at his hands, clean, warm, with a thin, fresh scrape above the knuckle. He tucked his hand back into his sleeve. "I don't want folks looking at you sideways," he added. "You are the elder's daughter. You hurt, that's plain. But when you say not him, someone will hear someone else is guilty. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. "And I am saying not him." He smiled again, this time almost sadly. "You're brave, Rachel, but bravery sometimes breaks what could have been kept." I took a step closer, not as a challenge, just so we didn't have to speak across the emptiness between us. "And what exactly are you trying to keep, John?" He raised his head. Our faces were close. I felt his breath, not mint, not harsh, just ordinary and warm. It became harder to keep my voice even. "Peace," he said, "and your good name. You were light to Eli. Don't let darkness trail after you now. Darkness doesn't follow words, I answered softly. It follows deeds. His gaze slid over my face and stopped at my lips. I saw it, and I knew he noticed I had seen. The moment hung. I stepped back and bowed my head, as if for prayer. He lowered his eyes, too. "Forgive me," he said simply. I said more than I should. "No, you only spoke aloud what shouldn't have been thought," I said. "We have an order. In that order, I am the betrothed of the dead, and you are his brother." He flinched barely, as if that word had gone deeper than the rest. "He was my brother," he said slowly, "and I will not let shadow fall on his name." "I don't want that either," I said. "That's why I will not be silent." He came by 2 more times that day, once to help Daddy with logs, once to bring a sack of oats. I happened to be nearby, at the well, by the dryer, in the yard with the buckets. We spoke briefly, yet longer each time than was proper. About small things, the rain promised for noon, the cow off her feed, the new wagon Abram was building. In every word something else trembled, the thing that could not be named. The longer we held to simple topics, the louder the unspoken thudded inside me. Toward evening, I carried folded towels to the pantry. He was already there, as if he'd just stopped in to check the latch. I set the linens on the shelf. It was cool inside, smelling of grain and dried herbs. He stood close, but did not touch me. I did not move either. We both knew. One step forward, and we would cross a line. "Do you still think someone?" he began. "I think he was not alone," I cut in. "Beyond that, I'll be quiet." "Good," he said. "Be quiet in a way that doesn't break you." He reached up not for me, but for the shelf above my shoulder. I felt the warmth of his palm very near. He took a rope and checked the knot. I did not step away. He did not either. The silence thickened. A chill ran over my skin, then heat. I gathered the towels to keep my fingers busy. "John," I said, "if you come again to speak of peace, bring me the truth. Without it, peace is a lid with no chest." He smiled with one corner of his mouth. "You ask more of me than the world allows." "The world isn't our law," I said. "Our law is do not lie." It seemed he meant to add something but didn't. Instead, he said suddenly, "I don't want you to fear me." "I'm not afraid of you," I said, and felt it was true. "I'm afraid of myself next to you." The words slipped out on their own. I steadied my breath and, for the first time, lifted my eyes straight to his. There was no mockery in his look. There was focus, and something else warm as a hand on a wrist. I stepped back half a pace. He lowered his head. "Then I will keep my distance," he whispered, "so you won't be afraid." "Keep it," I said. "But listen, if you have anything to say about that night, say it to me first." "Why you?" "Because I will betray neither myself nor his memory, and I won't go to the brothers until I'm certain." He looked straight at me, as if weighing my words. Then he nodded. "All right." We left the pantry. The sunset laid the shadows even like planks. I went left, he went right. For a heartbeat, our shoulders came so near that cloth brushed cloth. I felt his warmth. It was brief, but the feeling stayed in my body like the mark of a narrow ring. Late that evening, I worked in the kitchen. Water still whispered in the kettle. The lamp crackled. Mama had gone to bed. Daddy was reading scripture in the next room. I scrubbed the board, put the knife in its place, checked whether the towels were dry. On the shelf, I laid the hickory splinter I had found in the pantry. Beside it, the buttons. Small things have weight when you stack them together. A soft knock came at the door. I started. Folks shouldn't come so late. I went over without opening wide. "Who is it?" "Me," John whispered. "I brought tools for your father. He'll need them early tomorrow." I opened a little wider. He stood on the porch with a carpenter's box wrapped in burlap. I nodded toward the bench. "Leave it there." He set it down. Our fingers nearly touched when the burlap slipped. I jerked my hand back, but too late his skin lightly brushed mine. Nothing else happened, only that brief touch. but it was enough to quicken my heart. "Thank you," I said softly. "Rest," he answered just as softly, "and don't carry it all alone." "I am not alone," I said. "I have God and memory." He nodded. For a moment, it seemed he might raise his hand to bless me or to stop the fear moving between us, but he only stepped back. "Good night, Rachel." "Good night, John." I closed the door and leaned my back against the wood. The place where our fingers had touched still burned. I pressed my other wrist there to cool it. Then I turned to the table and looked again at the hickory splinter. I clenched it in my fingers and tucked it deeper into a cloth pocket. I knew this splinter would not speak on its own. It needed other things, a word that slips out at the wrong time, a glance that lingers a moment too long, a memory not yet wiped clean. I put out the lamp. Breathing got easier in the dark. I lay down, but sleep did not come. I listened to the house breathe, the faint scurry beyond the wall, a board clicking in a far corner, and I thought of him, of both of them, of how, between those two and me, a wall of rules and suspicion had risen, and how thinly it could be scratched with a single wrong step. I would not take that step, but I would not turn away from another, the road toward truth, even if it meant looking into the eyes of the one who wanted me to stop. The harvest celebration began as always, long tables in the schoolyard, pies on cloths, jugs of compote, singing after a short prayer. Children laughed, elders talked about hay and weather, the men measured new wagons with their eyes. The air smelled of apples, cornbread, and fresh shavings. The boys had built a new bench. I stood aside and kept the hickory splinter in my pocket. It was my stone. Squeeze it and remember why you are here. I knew I would speak today, not because I wanted to shame anyone. I wanted our prayers to stand on truth and not on a fable. In my head, I had stacked the short chain over and over, the stranger's knife in Eli's hand, the hickory splinter in the pantry floor. Samuel's mention that John had taken such a knife, the trace of night riding and the dried sweat on the bay, the fresh scrape on his hand, the doctor's words about the angle of the wound, awkward to make on yourself if you are right-handed when the knife was gripped the way it was. And one more thing, his stubborn urging that I accept peace. I waited until the second hymn ended. Then I stepped forward. I was afraid, but fear lay beneath my voice, not on top of it. "Brothers and sisters," I said. I asked to speak. People hushed. The deacon nodded. "Say it briefly, Rachel." "Brief," I agreed, "about Eli." A sigh rolled like a wave. I raised my hand. "I do not accept that he did this to himself. Please hear not my feelings, but the facts." I took the splinter from my pocket and set it in my open palm so all could see. On the morning we found Eli, this sliver was wedged in the pantry floorboards. It is hickory, not our wood. We use pine, maple. Hickory only appears here on new tool handles. "Samuel," I turned to him, "you said John took such a grooved handle knife. Is that so?" Samuel, embarrassed but honest, stood. "Yes, John took one," he said clearly. "Others did too, but John took one." "The doctor spoke with my father and the deacon about the angle of the wound," I went on. "I heard them. For a right-handed man doing this to himself, that angle is awkward. Eli was right-handed, and when a man grips a knife tight and pushes against resistance, it leaves a mark on the hand. Fresh." I shifted my eyes to John. "You had one, John. That day you told me about peace." The murmur deepened. John did not look away. Only his lips pressed a shade tighter. "Rachel," Daddy said quietly, "be careful with your words." "I am careful," I said. More. The night before, Lee heard the bay wheeze on the road. At dawn, John's horse was spent but scrubbed, gleaming. In the pen, the hoofprints were deep from haste, and the last thing, the knife. It was a stranger to our house, but not to a hand that loves order. The handle had shallow cross-hatching, like the ones Jacob brought in, the kind John took. "These are suppositions," the deacon said evenly, "grave ones." "These are things," I answered, "and there are words besides." I drew breath. John came to me 3 times urging that truth is heavier than a stone and that it is better to accept his own hand. He wanted me to stop. He spoke not for my honor. He spoke for his peace. Enough, John said. His voice was even, but metal edged it. You weave suspicion from splinters and smoke, Rachel. I took a knife, yes, as many did. I am clean before God. I stepped closer. Then tell us, where is that knife now? He was silent a beat. I saw his throat work. Lost, he said shortly. When? Daddy asked. I don't remember. Then I will say it, I said quietly. When your brother lay in the pantry, you put a stranger's handle in his hand so the pieces would fit. The yard roared to life. Someone leapt up. Rachel, someone lifted hands. Quiet, the deacon raised his palms. John, he said, we will question you in order, before the brothers. You will bring that knife if you have it and explain the night, without shouting. John looked around at the faces' circles tightening in. For a heartbeat, I saw in him what I had seen up close before. Not despair, not repentance resolve. He stepped back. A second step. Suddenly, he lunged and ran for the pantry. Stop, someone cried. 2 of the brothers rushed after him. He burst inside, ripped a lamp from a peg the boys had just hung, yanked flint from his pocket. It all happened faster than we could shift from prayer to motion. Dry straw, spilled oil, an open flame. Fire rose like a breath and grabbed the wall at once. Water, Daddy shouted. Form a line. People ran for the well. Buckets clacked. Hands fell into rhythm. Women lifted children out of the way. Someone dragged sacks from the pantry before the flames ate the passage. The deacon stood in the yard praying out loud not to replace water, but to keep fear from breaking our order. I ran with a bucket and kept my eyes on John. He didn't flee. He stood off to the side, watching the fire grow, breathing fast. When one brother grabbed for his elbow, he shoved him off and paced the wall, as if searching for a way out not from the yard, but from himself. Heat struck my face. The roof groaned. I passed the bucket along and heard Mama behind me repeat, Lord, have mercy. Smoke cut our eyes. People coughed, but did not give way. We fought the fire as we knew how, line by line until hands trembled. Back, Daddy shouted. The roof. People fell back. The roof caved inward with a dry moan. Flame punched upward. For a moment, everything was brighter than day. I saw the place burn where we once stacked sacks of wheat and hung our herbs. I saw our summer, our work, our quiet talks go up, and I understood what had been shared yesterday had cracked today. Some prayed and hauled water. Others stared at John and whispered whether it was true. Others backed away, eyes lowered, not wanting to see him standing by the blaze. When the walls fell, the heat settled. We poured water on the black beams for a long time until steam lifted. At last it was quiet. Only a wet corner hissed. The deacon lowered his hands. Daddy sank heavily onto what had once been a threshold. John, he said hoarsely, you set our pantry on fire. Why? John said nothing. Soot streaked his cheek. Burns marked his sleeve. His eyes shone dry. Because I won't let you eat me with your looks, he said at last. No, I won't run. But I won't stand under your words like a condemned man either. Burning is better. That is not an answer, the deacon said firmly. You will answer before the brothers, and before God. He nodded, as if the decision had been made without him. I looked at the ashes and knew. My past had burned with those walls. Here I learned to bind sheaves. Here I laughed with Eli. Here we hid apples from the children. Now here was a black pit. I pressed the hickory splinter in my palm. It was warm, almost hot. I did not rejoice that I had spoken, but I did not regret it. I lifted my eyes and met John's gaze. There was no pleading in it, only stubbornness and something that cannot be hidden by words or ash. I walked from the ruins slowly, as if my feet were learning new ground, one after the other. I still smelled of smoke. My braid, neat in the morning, had fallen loose and dragged black dust across my shoulders. Thin scratches from buckets and wet boards marked my palms. The soot clung to my skin as if it wanted to stay. I didn't wipe it away. It was the truth about the day, and I had to carry it. We scattered without talking once the flames fell. Some stacked the beams that had survived. Some sat on the ground and whispered psalms. People looked at me in different ways. Some straight on, without blame. Others wary, as if I had brought a storm through the gate. I stopped no one and asked no permission. I only went into the house, washed in cold water, but left a thin grayness on my face, and took my small shawl I had once embroidered myself. I paused at the table. The hickory splinter lay there. I slipped it into my pocket. It was my key to a door that would not open back again. Daddy sat on the bench by the window. His face was hard, his hands heavy. He did not stand when I came in, and he did not ask where I was going. He knew. Mama stood by the stove and stroked a towel like a child who cries without sound. "I'm going," I said. "Where?" Daddy asked, with no surprise in his voice. "Where I don't have to keep silent while something inside me screams," I answered. "I'm afraid, but I can't stay and act as if this didn't happen before my eyes." Daddy nodded slowly. Mama lifted her tired, warm gaze to me. "Will you come back?" she asked softly. "I don't know," I said. "I want to be honest and to pray the way I used to. Maybe I will manage only the first." Mama stepped to me and hugged me. Her apron smelled of milk and smoke. Something soft stirred in my chest, and I tightened it at once so I wouldn't break on the threshold. Daddy stood, came over, and laid his palm on my head. "May God keep you," he said simply. "If the truth lives in your heart, the road won't break you." I bowed and went out. The road to the highway was familiar. We hauled hay and apples along it. Today it felt different, like a string pulled not backward but forward. The sun was already sinking, throwing long shadows. The fields settled, the cows were ambling home. I stopped by the old maple, and for the first time that day, I cried a short, quiet cry. Tears did not wash away the soot. That too was truth. I had long known John looked at me not as his brother's friend. I had seen it in small things, how he went silent when I came in, how he set a jug closer to my hand, how he remembered even my simplest words. I neither encouraged nor pushed him away. I kept the distance we keep. I thought that was enough, that feelings can stand straight if you do not touch them. I even thought that in time they would settle into what they should be, a memory that does no harm. I did not think that this love could make the sudden move that breaks a life. I did not think jealousy could lift a hand where we are used to folding fingers for prayer. That thought came to me only when the flames rose and, instead of an answer, John chose fire. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no rightness, only cold. Where a pantry burns, people crack. I walked on. At the crossroads, I met Abram. He was driving his empty wagon home. He saw me and stopped. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. "Thank you," I said. "I'll go on foot. I need to feel the road under my feet." He nodded and drove on. I watched him go and thought how the kindness of simple folk sometimes holds us better than the words of our elders. The town was not far. We rarely went there, to buy metal, to sell apples. I knew there would be different noise, a different world, different looks. I was afraid. I felt guilt for saying aloud what split the community, for not stopping John when maybe a word could have, for the two names that now lived in my heart, one of them forever silent. When it got dark, I topped a rise. Ahead, beyond the fields and the river, town lights glittered small, flickering, like someone had spilled crumbs of the sky across the earth. I stood on the shoulder. The wind brought the smell of fuel oil and fresh bread from strange bakeries. Behind me lay our dark land, slow, steady, with its songs and rules. Ahead lay what I did not yet know how to name. I took the hickory splinter from my pocket, squeezed it in my fingers, and finally let it go, dropped it in the grass. It vanished as if it had never been. I didn't know whether I would feel lighter without it, but I understood that evidence is a bridge, not a home. You cross it and keep going. I stepped to the edge of the road. A car coming from town slowed. The driver rolled down his window and asked me something in English. I answered simply, "I'm headed toward the lights." He nodded and pointed out a footpath that cut the walk to the bridge. I thanked him and kept walking. I wanted to enter those lights not as a passenger, but as someone who had chosen. Just before the bridge, I stopped again. I looked at the lights blinking steady and indifferent. I felt the evening air cold on my skin, the tiredness in my muscles, the emptiness and strange clarity in my chest. The voice inside me, which all day had shifted from prayer to rebuke to silence, leveled out. God was silent, but I heard myself, I whispered. The words went into the dark and did not return as an echo. I stepped onto the bridge. Hit like and don't forget to subscribe. The next story will be even more intense. But if you are under 18, don't even think about clicking next.